This is Dr. Russell Blaylock, and you're listening to the Blaylock Health Channel. Welcome to the Blaylock Health Channel. Today what I'm going to talk about a little bit is magnesium and its effect both in medical conditions and general health. Now, what we need to know about magnesium is that it's primarily an intracellular ion. And that's important to know because even a lot of physicians don't know that if you measure the magnesium in the blood, that is not a good measure of the magnesium in the tissues and organs of the body where most magnesium is located. So you can have a normal blood level of magnesium and be severely or even marginally deficient in magnesium in the tissues. And of course, this can lead to pathology, particularly when it's low in the heart and the brain. The other thing we need to know about magnesium is that it has a lot of effects in health and in disease as well. That's because magnesium is a rather significant antioxidant. It raises glutathione levels in tissues, the cells, and glutathione is your primary detoxification molecule as well as antioxidant. It improves blood flow. It's very slightly anticoagulant. And it improves the blood flow primarily in the microvessels, that is, the vessels that are bringing the oxygen and the nutrients to the tissues themselves. And that's where a lot of problem occurs in disease, is interference with the microcirculation, the microvessels. It is also a very potent anti-inflammatory. Its anti-inflammatory potential penetrates throughout the body because magnesium is intracellular. So it's a very potent and important anti-inflammatory. It is a metabolic stimulant. It's important as a coenzyme in some 300 or 400 enzymes in the body, many of which have to do with production of energy. It is a rather potent antispasmodic. That is, it reduces spasms of both smooth muscles and skeletal muscles. The smooth muscles being things like the muscles in blood vessels and the lining of the GI tract. Now, because of all of these various properties of magnesium, it's very beneficial in maintaining health and in treating a number of diseases. For instance, one of the things that I picked up quite by accident, I ate at a restaurant and I got a very severe case of gastroenteritis. I was just in extreme pain with abdominal cramping. I remembered that magnesium was a smooth muscle relaxant, so I mixed some up in a glass of water and drank it and put about 360 milligrams of magnesium malate citrate, which you could buy as a supplement, and put in the water, about 10 ounces of water, mixed it well, and drank it. Within 2 or 3 minutes, all the pain had subsided, and it never returned. I just used a single dose, never had it happen again. Since that time, I've tested it again when I would have abdominal cramping from various things, like certain foods you eat or whatever cause, and it works every time. So it's a very good way to treat gastroenteritis. And it may be good for even the very, very severe forms of gastroenteritis. When you see these cases where children eat a little bit of raw meat, hamburger meat or something, or chicken, and they consume an E. coli that's pathogenic and develop shutdown of the renal system and coagulation of the vessels in the arms and legs and very severe cases and die, there's good evidence that magnesium infusions in those children, or if you can catch them right away, have them drink the magnesium solution, may very well block this toxic effect on the kidneys and the cardiovascular system and prevent death. There's also evidence that it can prevent or certainly reduce the risk of anaphylactic shock. Magnesium, because of its powerful anti-inflammatory effect, may help it. Now, I also had a relative who had strong sensitivity to insect stings and would carry around the epinephrine with her all the time. I suggested upping her magnesium intake, and since that time, she has no more severe reaction to the bee stings. And it makes sense. It makes perfect pathological and physiological sense. Another important area in which you can use magnesium is for prevention of gallstones. A number of studies have shown that magnesium inhibits the formation of these stones in the liver and being deposited in the gallbladder. And it's also very good for spasms of the bile duct. Sometimes you'll go out and eat fatty food, fried food, and you'll have this pain in your right upper quadrant of your abdomen, right under your ribs on the right side, and that's usually a spasm of the bile duct. You can drink some of this magnesium solution I described, and that will relieve it quite rapidly. Another area that I found that it really works well is in preventing kidney stones. Now, that has been studied rather extensively and is proven to be a powerful inhibitor of the most common type of kidney stone, that is the calcium oxalate stone. So regular calcium supplementation, say with even 500 milligrams a day, is usually sufficient to prevent the formation of kidney stones. Also happened to treat a person who had an attack of a kidney stone, and the pain associated with a kidney stone is considered one of the two worst pains that a human can experience. And this is because the stone gets lodged in the ureter. It throws the ureter into intense spasm and waves of spasm, which is just almost unbearable. And this person was in that condition at the time. It happened to be a Sunday, and we were trying to find an emergency room that we could bring him to close by, but we ended up driving to a hospital. But before we left, I suggested the magnesium. We gave him some magnesium. By the time he got to the hospital, he had no pain whatsoever, and the pain never returned. We continued the magnesium for the next week or so and gradually passed the stone, but never had any more pain after that, and has never had any more stones over the next 4 or 5 years. So it's a good way to prevent stones, and if you have a stone with an attack of kidney stone pain, because it is a smooth muscle relaxant, it will stop the spasm in the ureter, and it increases the chances of passing the stone safely. So that's something that you might keep in mind. On more severe things and chronic diseases, like, for instance, in the brain where we see neurodegeneration, what we know is that in cases of Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, Lou Gehrig disease, ALS, and Huntington's disease, when they look at the brain tissue and various areas of the brain and examine the amount of magnesium, they find consistently very low levels. And when they look at the spinal fluid, they see low levels of magnesium in the spinal fluid. In fact, in Parkinson's disease, you'll see a progressively decreasing level of magnesium in the spinal fluid as the disease progresses. So there's a strong correlation between magnesium and neurodegeneration. And that makes a lot of sense because neurodegeneration in the brain with these dementing and paralytic diseases is inflammatory and driven by immunoexcitotoxicity, which is an interaction between inflammation in the brain, activation of certain inflammatory cells called microglia, and the release of high levels of glutamate, which is an excitotoxin. Interestingly, magnesium blocks both of these reactions. It reduces the inflammation, and it helps block part of the excitotoxic reaction in the brain. One recent study in which they had an Alzheimer model, an animal model of Alzheimer's disease, and they gave some of the animals a magnesium threonate, which is a highly absorbable form of magnesium and enters the brain very easily. And they found that the animals that were given the magnesium threonate not only had far fewer of the plaques in their brain, but it also reduced existing plaque numbers. And the animals return to the same ability to carry out their mazes and different tests of cognitive function in the animals. They return to normal, which was quite dramatic. Now, this has not been done in humans, but it makes sense since we know that in human Alzheimer's disease, the brain levels as well as spinal fluid levels of magnesium are quite low. And when the magnesium levels in the brain are low, the brain becomes inflamed and becomes highly susceptible to this excitotoxicity reaction. The Japanese have studied the relationship of magnesium, and what happened in the Japanese study, which they did in 2012, They looked at 303 people and followed them for 17 years. And they found the ones that were given adequate amounts of magnesium, either in their diet or supplementation, had reduced incidence of dementia that was significant, particularly what we call vascular dementia. That is, the blood vessels become atherosclerotic, and that interferes with brain cell function and causes degeneration of the brain. That's a very common type of dementia, and usually there's mixed dementia, so you get vascular dementia on top of the typical Alzheimer's disease, and magnesium appears to inhibit the development of both of them. In another study, they looked at people and their risk of developing what we call mild cognitive impairment. That's sort of what we used to call having a senior moment, where you forget where you left your keys, or you forgot where your car's located in the parking lot, just minor problems with memory, having trouble with names, etc. And this was a study done in Australia in 2014. And what they found is that people who had higher levels of magnesium intake had far less incidence of mild cognitive impairment. So that's a very important finding. And in this study, they looked at 1,406 people, which they followed for 8 years. The average age, or the mean age of the people involved in the study was 62 years. It's also been shown that magnesium reduces instability of the gene, which can lead to a lot of different disorders, including cancer. So it's probably by its anti-inflammatory effect is reducing that instability of genes. It's known that high fructose corn syrup intake in the diet, which of course would be very common in the Western diet, particularly in the United States, when you have a high intake of this high fructose corn syrup, in addition to a low magnesium, there's a substantial increased risk of developing metabolic syndrome. And of course, this metabolic syndrome is high blood pressure, high blood lipids, and type 2 diabetes and obesity. So there's a very strong correlation between those two. Magnesium deficiency is very common in the Western world, particularly United States, because people eat very few fruits and vegetables, particularly the vegetables, which are your main source of magnesium. And that puts most of these people at risk, not only for metabolic syndrome, atherosclerosis, heart attack, stroke, but also the dementing diseases as well. Interestingly, just as kind of an aside, they've found out that magnesium protects plants from being damaged by high levels of aluminum. So if there's a lot of aluminum in the soil going on the plant, it can ruin your plants, but magnesium can block that plant toxicity. Now, how should you take magnesium? Well, of course, the most logical way to improve your magnesium intake is to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables and some nuts. The problem with eating a lot of nuts, like particularly peanuts and walnuts and cashew nuts, is that they're also high in glutamate, which if you have migraine headaches or neurodegenerative diseases or cancer, that'll make you worse, that high glutamate intake. So I wouldn't depend on nuts as a source of magnesium, but your vegetables are all high in magnesium level. And so that would be a good source. Now, if you're eating your 5 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, and you have a high risk of one of these diseases, then you might want to supplement with magnesium as well. There's several ways to do it. One is a slow-release magnesium, which contains magnesium malate. There's a company called Jigsaw Health, which you can find at www.jigsawhealth.com. It has a very good slow-release tablet that you can take two of the tablets twice a day. That's pretty good maintenance, particularly if you're eating a lot of vegetables. If you need a higher intake, you can take up to 6 tablets a day, 2 tablets 3 times a day to get a higher level. Now, this also is better absorbed, is less likely to have diarrhea with it, which you will have if you take magnesium oxide, is notorious for causing rather significant diarrhea. The Jigsaw brand, usually because of its slow absorption, will soften the stool so that you're having better bowel movements, but it's unlikely unless you have a very sensitive GI tract, that you'll have diarrhea. The magnesium L-threonate, Threonate, the threonate is the form that was used to prevent Alzheimer's disease and return the Alzheimer's animals back to normal. It usually comes in a 200 milligram capsule, which you can take one of those twice to 3 times a day. Now, the amount of magnesium in the magnesium L-threonate is rather low, but you get very high brain penetration, much higher than you would taking a much higher dose of one of the other forms of magnesium. So to get the magnesium in the brain, apparently magnesium L-threonate is the best form. And there's a powdered form called magnesium malate citrate made by Pure Encapsulation Company, which is a powder in a capsule. Taking that can cause diarrhea in some people. I generally use that form of it for mixing in the water. Now, if you're going to treat, for instance, the kidney stone attack or the gallbladder attack or the gastroenteritis attack, the spasms of the intestine, I would recommend mixing the magnesium citrate malate in water, about 10 to 12 ounces of water, mix it well, and drink that solution. Usually 2 capsules is sufficient to get the results that you want, but you may want to go up to 3 capsules at a time. So I hope that this information on magnesium, which is just sort of an introduction, is beneficial, and I appreciate you listening. The information contained within these programs is not intended to replace or contradict that of your physician. This information is for educational purposes only.